The sun hung low in the sky, casting warm, golden light across the busy street corner where a boy no older than 12 stood quietly, clutching a small, crumpled bill in his hand. His clothes were simple and a bit worn, but his eyes were full of an unyielding kindness that seemed to shine brighter than the setting sun. The boy's gaze drifted to a figure sitting on the pavement nearby, a man whose tattered jacket and weathered face told a story of hard years and unspoken struggles. The man sat in silence, his legs stretched out awkwardly, revealing the prosthetic limb attached to his left knee. His shoulders hunched forward, and he looked down at his hands, which fumbled with a small cardboard sign resting on the ground beside a battered hat. The sign read, "Disabled Veteran. Anything helps. God bless." Passers-by walked briskly, their faces averted, as if afraid to meet the man's eyes. Some clutched shopping bags, others fiddled with their phones, but none stopped. The boy hesitated for a moment, his gaze darting between the man and the crumpled bill in his hand. He bit his lip. That money wasn't much, barely enough to buy the loaf of bread he'd been sent to get, but the sight of the veteran sitting there alone struck a chord deep within him. The boy's steps were small and tentative at first, but with each one, his resolve grew stronger. Finally, he stood before the man and held out the bill. "Here," the boy said softly, his voice barely audible above the hum of the street. The veteran looked up, startled. His gray eyes, clouded with a mix of exhaustion and disbelief, searched the boy's face. "What are you doing, kid?" the man asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "You don't have to do that." The boy smiled shyly, his cheeks reddening. "It's not much, but maybe it can help," he said. "You look like you need it more than I do." The man stared at the bill for a long moment before shaking his head. "You're a good kid," he muttered, his voice thick with emotion. "But you don't owe me anything." The boy hesitated, but then gently placed the bill into the veteran's hat. "It's okay," he said simply. "You deserve it." Before the man could protest further, the boy turned and walked away, his heart lighter despite his empty pocket. He didn't notice the pair of sharp eyes watching the scene unfold from a sleek black car parked across the street. Inside the car, a man in an expensive suit leaned forward, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He was middle-aged, his face clean-shaven and marked by the kind of lines that came from years of ambition and control. His expression was unreadable as he watched the boy disappear down the street. "Did you see that?" he muttered to himself, glancing at his phone as if debating whether to act. Moments earlier, he'd been scrolling through emails, his mind preoccupied with a high-stakes deal that could make or break his career. But the boy's small act of kindness had jarred him, pulling him out of his bubble of privilege and success. The suited man rolled down his window, watching as the veteran picked up the bill with trembling hands. The man's expression softened for a fleeting moment before hardening again, as if he didn't want to acknowledge the tug of emotion in his chest. With a deep breath, he reached for his phone and dialed a number. "Get me everything you can on the kid and the veteran," he said briskly when the call connected. "I want names, backgrounds, everything. And do it quickly." The person on the other end of the line hesitated. "Are you sure, sir?" "It might take some time, just do it," the man interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. He hung up and leaned back in his seat, his gaze returning to the street corner. Meanwhile, the boy walked home, the evening chill nipping at his cheeks. He felt a pang of worry about what his family might say when he returned empty-handed, but the thought of the veteran's gratitude made it worth it. He could still see the man's face in his mind, how it had lit up, however briefly, when he'd accepted the money.at home. The boy's mother was waiting, her arms crossed and her expression a mixture of concern and exasperation. "Where's the bread?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. The boy looked down, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I gave the money to someone who needed it more," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, his mother said nothing, her eyes softening as she took in her son's sincerity. Finally, she sighed and pulled him into a hug. You have a big heart, she said quietly. But next time, let's talk about it first, okay? The boy nodded, relieved that she wasn't angry. He promised himself he'd find a way to make it up to her, though he wasn't sure how. Back on the street corner, the veteran sat staring at the bill in his hand, his mind racing. It wasn't just the money, it was the gesture, the boy's pure and selfless act of kindness, that left him shaken. He hadn't felt seen or valued in years, and for a child to offer him what little he had, it was almost too much to process. Unbeknownst to both the boy and the veteran, their brief interaction had set something much larger in motion. The man in the suit wasn't one to act on impulse, but something about the scene he'd witnessed compelled him to dig deeper. He didn't know why he cared. Perhaps it was guilt, or perhaps it was a long-buried sense of morality clawing its way to the surface. The following day, the boy returned to school, the memory of his encounter with the veteran still fresh in his mind. He didn't tell anyone about it, partly because he didn't think it was a big deal and partly because he didn't want to draw attention to himself. But as he sat in his classroom, trying to focus on his teacher's words, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Across town, the veteran woke up to an unexpected surprise. A clean set of clothes and a hot breakfast had been left for him by an anonymous donor, along with a note that simply read, "Pay it forward." The veteran's hands trembled as he held the note, a spark of hope igniting in his chest for the first time in years. And in a high-rise office overlooking the city, the man in the suit leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his lips. His team had delivered the information he'd requested, and he now had everything he needed to set his plan in motion. The boy had no idea that his simple act of kindness had been witnessed, let alone that it had inspired someone powerful to take action. As he walked home from school that day, his mind wandered, wondering if the veteran was okay. Little did he know, forces far beyond his understanding were at work, and his life was about to take a turn he could never have imagined. The suited man stepped out of his car later that evening, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement as he approached the veteran's spot. The veteran looked up, startled by the man's commanding presence. "Can I help you?" the veteran asked warily, his voice tinged with suspicion. The man smiled faintly, holding out a hand. "Actually, I think we can help each other," he said. The veteran hesitated before shaking the man's hand, unsure of what to expect. And from a distance, hidden in the shadows of a nearby alley, the boy watched the exchange with wide eyes, a mix of curiosity and apprehension swirling in his chest. He didn't know who the man was or why he was talking to the veteran, but something about the scene felt significant, as if it marked the beginning of a story far bigger than any of them could have anticipated. And so, the threads of their lives began to intertwine, bound together by an act of kindness that none of them would ever forget. What came next was still a mystery, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The boy lingered in the shadows, torn between fear and curiosity. The man in the suit seemed out of place in the world he knew. His polished appearance and confident demeanor were starkly different from the worn-down veteran, who now stood uncertainly before him. The boy had no idea what they could be discussing, but the sight of the two together sent a strange chill through him. He considered stepping forward, but something held him back, an instinct that told him to stay hidden. The man in the suit gestured toward a nearby CAF, his voice calm but firm. "Let's talk inside." "It's too cold out here," he said. The veteran hesitated, glancing around as if expecting someone to tell him this was a mistake. After a moment, he nodded reluctantly and followed the man inside. The boy pressed himself against the cold brick wall, his heart pounding. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but his mind raced with possibilities. Was the man offering help? Or was there something more sinister at play? The veteran didn't look like someone who trusted easily, yet he'd gone along willingly. The boy couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stumbled onto something important, something far bigger than himself. Inside the CAF, the veteran sat stiffly in a chair, his hands resting awkwardly on the table. The man in the suit ordered coffee for both of them, his movements deliberate and practiced, like someone used to being in control. He slid a cup toward the veteran, who stared at it as though it were a trap. "Relax," the man said, his tone disarming. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to talk." The veteran narrowed his eyes. "Why me?" he asked gruffly. "There are plenty of people out there. Why go out of your way for someone like me?" The man leaned back in his chair, studying the veteran carefully. "Because I saw something yesterday that I couldn't ignore," he said. "That boy, he gave you everything he had without a second thought. Do you know how rare that is?" The veteran's expression softened for a moment before hardening again. "The kid's got a good heart," he said. "But that doesn't explain why you're here." The man nodded, acknowledging the point. "You're right. It doesn't. But let's just say I believe in rewarding goodness when I see it. And I think you've been overlooked for far too long." The veteran blinked, clearly taken aback. "You don't even know me," he said quietly. "You don't know what I've done." The man's gaze didn't waver. "I know enough," he said. "You served your country. You sacrificed more than most people can imagine. And now you're sitting on a street corner, forgotten by the very system you fought to protect." "That's wrong." The veteran's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He wasn't used to people seeing him as anything other than a burden. Meanwhile, the boy remained outside, his curiosity gnawing at him. He edged closer to the CAF window, trying to catch a glimpse of what was happening inside. The sight of the veteran sitting across from the suited man only deepened his confusion. Why would someone so polished, so obviously important, take an interest in a man who had nothing to offer? The boy's thoughts were interrupted by a low voice behind him. "What are you doing here?" He spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. An older woman stood a few feet away, her sharp eyes fixed on him. She wore a heavy coat and carried a shopping bag, her expression a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "Hiya," the boy stammered, scrambling for an excuse. "I was just waiting for someone." The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "You've been standing there a while," she said. "Are you in trouble?" The boy shook his head quickly. "No, ma'am. I'm fine." The woman studied him for a moment longer before sighing. "Well, you should get home. It's not safe to be hanging around out here after dark." The boy nodded, grateful for the excuse to leave. "Yes, ma'am. I'll go now." As he walked away, his mind raced. He hadn't learned anything useful, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of it. The man in the suit and the veteran were connected now, and somehow, he felt tied to them as well. Inside the CAF, the conversation between the two men continued. The veteran, still skeptical, leaned forward slightly. "So, what's your angle?" he asked. "People like you don't just show up out of nowhere for no reason." The man in the suit smiled faintly, as if he'd expected the question. "Let's just say I've been given opportunities in life that most people don't get," he said. "And I believe in paying it forward. Yesterday, I saw a boy give up everything he had to help you. If a child can show that kind of selflessness, what excuse do the rest of us have?" The veteran frowned, his mind grappling with the man's words. "So, what do you want from me?" "Nothing," the man said simply. "But I do want to give you something, a chance to start over. A job, a place to stay, whatever you need to get back on your feet." The veteran stared at him, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and suspicion. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because I can," the man replied. "And because it's the right thing to do." The veteran didn't answer right away. Years of disappointment had taught him to be wary of offers that seemed too good to be true. But there was something in the man's tone, a quiet conviction that made him pause. Outside, the boy hurried home, his thoughts swirling. He didn't know what the man in the suit was planning, but he couldn't help feeling that it would somehow ripple back to him. As he turned the corner onto his street, he resolved to keep an eye on the situation. Something told him this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next morning, the veteran woke up to find a small envelope beside him on the bench where he'd slept. Inside was a neatly folded piece of paper and a key. The note read, "There's an apartment waiting for you at this address. No strings attached. Consider it a fresh start." The veteran's hands trembled as he read the note. It was signed with only a first name, but he recognized it as the man in the suits. He sat there for a long time, staring at the key, unsure whether to believe it was real. Across town, the man in the suit sat in his office, his mind already moving to the next step of his plan. He didn't fully understand why the boy's actions had affected him so deeply, but he knew he couldn't ignore it. It wasn't just about the veteran, it was about something bigger, something he couldn't quite put into words yet. And in the boy's small home, he sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly picking at his breakfast. His mother noticed his distraction but didn't press him. She knew her son well enough to recognize when he had something on his mind. As the days passed, the lives of the boy, the veteran, and the man in the suit began to intertwine in ways none of them could have predicted. The boy continued to watch from the sidelines, his curiosity growing with each passing moment. The veteran, cautiously optimistic, decided to take the man up on his offer, though he remained wary of what might come next. And the man in the suit, driven by a sense of purpose he couldn't explain, began laying the groundwork for a plan that would change all their lives forever. But beneath the surface of this seemingly benevolent act, questions lingered. What was the man's true motivation? Why had he been watching so closely? And what role would the boy play in the unfolding events? The answers were still hidden, waiting to reveal themselves. And as the boy lay awake one night, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something extraordinary, something that would test his courage and his kindness in ways he'd never imagined. Days turned into weeks, and the boy couldn't help but notice small changes around him. The man in the suit seemed to appear more frequently, though always in the background. Sometimes the boy caught glimpses of him speaking to other shop owners, neighbors, even a few people who seemed out of place, dressed in sharp attire like they belonged in another part of town. It was as if he was quietly orchestrating something, though the boy had no idea what. The veteran, on the other hand, was a different man. Gone was the hunched figure sitting on a street corner, invisible to most. He now walked with a cautious confidence, dressed in clean clothes and showing a sense of purpose the boy had never seen before. Sometimes he would spot the veteran helping out at the local shelter or talking to a group of kids at the park. People were starting to notice him, and for the first time in years, he wasn't invisible anymore. But as much as the boy wanted to believe things were getting better, a nagging feeling lingered. The man in the suit had good intentions, at least, that's how it seemed, but there was something about him that didn't sit right. He moved too carefully, spoke too smoothly, like someone who was used to keeping secrets. And then there was the matter of why he'd chosen the veteran in the first place. The boy couldn't shake the thought that there was more to it than just kindness. One evening, the boy decided he'd had enough of wondering. He followed the man in the suit, staying a safe distance behind. The man walked with purpose, his long strides carrying him toward a part of the city the boy rarely visited. The streets became quieter, the lights dimmer, and the buildings taller. Finally, the man disappeared through the doors of a sleek office building. The boy hesitated outside, unsure what to do next. He couldn't exactly walk in without being noticed, but he also couldn't turn back now. His heart raced as he searched for another way inside. Spotting a side alley, he crept around the building, finding a narrow fire escape. He climbed carefully, his hands trembling as he reached a window on the second floor. Peering inside, the boy saw the man in the suit sitting in a large room, surrounded by people who looked just as polished and serious as he did. Papers and screens covered the table in front of them, and they were deep in conversation. The boy couldn't hear everything they were saying, but certain words caught his attention: funding, project, and target. The boy's stomach twisted. What kind of project required this level of secrecy? And what did they mean by target? He leaned closer, trying to make out more of the conversation, but his foot slipped on the ledge. He caught himself just in time, but the noise drew the attention of someone inside. One of the men in the room glanced toward the window, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness outside. The boy froze, his breath caught in his throat. For a terrifying moment, he thought he'd been spotted, but the man turned back to the others, dismissing the noise as nothing. The boy climbed down as quickly and quietly as he could, his mind racing. He couldn't ignore what he'd just seen, but he didn't know who to talk to about it. The veteran came to mind, but what if he was already involved? The thought made the boy's chest tighten. He had to be sure before saying anything. Over the next few days, the boy kept a close watch on the man in the suit and the veteran. He noticed that the two met more frequently, often in places away from prying eyes. Their conversations were brief but intense, and the veteran's demeanor grew more focused with each meeting. It was as if he was preparing for something, though what that was, the boy couldn't guess. One afternoon, the boy saw the veteran carrying a duffel bag, his expression set in a way that made him seem almost unrecognizable. He followed at a distance, his pulse quickening with every step. The veteran entered a building the boy didn't recognize, and after a few minutes, the man in the suit joined him. The boy hesitated outside, torn between his fear of being caught and his need to know the truth. Finally, he slipped inside, staying hidden in the shadows. He could hear voices coming from a nearby room, their tones urgent but controlled. "We don't have much time," the man in the suit was saying. "Everything has to be in place before they notice." "They already have," the veteran replied. "I've seen them watching. We're running out of room to maneuver." The boy's stomach dropped. Who were they talking about? And what were they planning? The voices grew quieter as the men moved deeper into the building, and the boy crept closer, trying to follow. His heart pounded in his ears as he peered around a corner, catching a glimpse of the room they had entered. Inside, he saw maps pinned to the walls, along with documents and photographs he couldn't make out from his position. Before he could get a better look, a hand clamped down on his shoulder. The boy gasped, spinning around to see a security guard towering over him. "What are you doing here, kid?" the guard demanded, his grip firm. "I was just," the boy stammered, but before he could explain, the door to the room opened, and the man in the suit stepped out. His eyes locked onto the boy, his expression unreadable. "It's all right," the man said to the guard. "He's with me." The guard hesitated but eventually released the boy, muttering something under his breath as he walked away. The man in the suit turned to the boy, his calm demeanor betraying nothing. "You've been following me," he said simply. The boy swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I just wanted to know what's going on," he admitted. "Why are you helping him? And what's all this about?" The man studied him for a long moment before gesturing for him to follow. The boy hesitated but ultimately obeyed, his legs feeling like lead as he stepped into the room. Inside, the veteran looked up, his expression a mix of surprise and concern. "What's he doing here?" he asked. "He's curious," the man in the suit said. "And I think it's time he knew the truth." The boy's eyes darted between the two men, his heart racing as he waited for an explanation. The room seemed to close in around him, the weight of the moment pressing down like a storm about to break. The man in the suit glanced at the boy, his face unreadable, before turning back to the veteran. "He deserves to know. He's more involved in this than he realizes." The veteran frowned, his hand tightening on the strap of the duffel bag he carried. There was a pause so thick it felt like the room itself held its breath. The boy shifted uncomfortably under their gaze. I don't understand." "You're helping him, but why all this secrecy? And what's in the bag?" His voice wavered, but he pushed the questions out. The man in the suit let out a slow breath, as if deciding how much to reveal. "What you stumbled into wasn't an accident. That day when you gave him your money, you changed the trajectory of something far bigger than either of us could have predicted." That act of kindness had caught someone's attention. Someone powerful. The veteran nodded grimly. And not necessarily someone on our side. The boy's stomach churned. What do you mean? Who's watching? The man's eyes narrowed, his voice growing colder. There are people out there who don't like disruptions. Systems are in place to keep the powerless where they are, to make sure people like him. He nodded toward the veteran stay invisible. What you did? It made waves. Someone saw potential in him, but it also painted a target on his back. And now they're watching us all. The boy's heart sank. His simple gesture of kindness had felt so small, so inconsequential at the time. Now it seemed he'd set off a chain reaction he could barely comprehend. Before he could ask more, the veteran stepped forward, his voice steady but urgent. This is bigger than you, kid. Bigger than me. And it's already in motion. They won't stop until they've torn this apart. Who are they? The boy pressed. The man in the suit exchanged a glance with the veteran. That's the question we've been trying to answer, he admitted. But whoever they are, they've got resources. Money, connections, and the ability to erase people like us without a second thought. The boy's pulse quickened. So, what's the plan? How do we stop them? For the first time, the man hesitated. That's what we're working on. And we could use someone with your tenacity. The boy blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Me? What can I do? You've already proven you're willing to take risks for what's right, the veteran said. That's more than most people. The boy felt a surge of pride mixed with fear. Okay. But what exactly am I signing up for? The man in the suit gave him a small, knowing smile. Let's just say you're about to see how deep this rabbit hole goes. Before the boy could respond, the door to the room slammed open, and a figure stepped inside. It was someone he hadn't seen before, but their presence was commanding and cold. Dressed in all black, with an air of authority, the stranger surveyed the room with a calculating gaze. You've been busy, the newcomer said, their voice low but sharp. The man in the suit's expression hardened. You're early. Didn't think you'd mind, the stranger replied, stepping further into the room. We need to talk. Now. The boy instinctively moved closer to the veteran, his sense of unease growing. The tension in the room was palpable, and it was clear that whoever this person was, they weren't an ally. The man in the suit gestured toward the boy and the veteran. This isn't the time. It's exactly the time, the stranger countered. Their gaze flicked to the boy, and a faint smirk crossed their lips. So this is the kid who started all this. The boy bristled. I didn't start anything. I just tried to help. The stranger's smirk widened. And look where that got you. The man in the suit stepped between them, his voice firm. Enough. If you have something to say, say it. Otherwise, leave. The stranger chuckled darkly. You're in over your head, as usual. They're coming for you, all of you. And when they do, don't expect me to clean up the mess. The veteran's grip on his bag tightened, and his jaw set. Let them come, he said quietly. The strangers shook their head, their expression unreadable. Brave words. Let's hope you live long enough to back them up. Without another word, the stranger turned and walked out, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. The boy looked to the man in the suit, his voice barely above a whisper. Who was that? Someone who's playing their own game, the man replied, his jaw tight. The boy's head spun with questions, but before he could ask them, the veteran stepped forward, his voice urgent. We need to move. Now. The man in the suit nodded. Agreed. They're closer than I thought. The boy followed them out of the building, his heart pounding as they stepped into the night. The air felt charged, heavy with the promise of what was to come. He didn't know what he'd gotten himself into, but one thing was clear, there was no turning back now. The boy barely had time to process what was happening as they hurried through the dimly lit streets. Every shadow felt alive, every sound sharp and unnerving. The man in the suit moved with purpose, his eyes scanning for threats, while the veteran kept a firm grip on the duffel bag. The boy tried to stay close, his breath coming in short, nervous bursts. They reached an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where secrets could stay buried. Inside, the air was cold and still, and the faint hum of distant machinery added an eerie undercurrent. The man in the suit quickly secured the area, while the veteran placed the bag on a table in the center of the room. The boy's curiosity burned. "What's in the bag? You keep saying this is bigger than me, but I don't even know what we're dealing with." The veteran looked at him, his expression heavy with a mix of regret and determination. "It's not just a bag, kid. It's proof. Proof that the people pulling the strings aren't untouchable." The boy leaned in as the veteran unzipped the bag. Inside was a small, unassuming device. It didn't look like much, just a sleek, metallic object with blinking lights, but the way the veteran and the man in the suit regarded it made it clear it was something extraordinary. "This," the veteran said, his voice low, "is what they're after. It holds data that could bring down an empire of lies." The boy's heart raced. "Why not just expose it?" The man in the suit shook his head. "It's not that simple. They control the narrative. They'll spin it, bury it, make sure no one believes it. That's why we need to do this right." Before they could say more, a loud bang echoed through the warehouse. The boy jumped, his pulse skyrocketing. The veteran grabbed the device and shoved it into the boy's hands. "Run," he ordered. The boy hesitated. "What about you?" The veteran gave him a hard look. "Don't argue. You're the only one who can get this out now. We'll hold them off." The boy's legs felt like lead, but something in the veteran's tone pushed him to move. Clutching the device tightly, he bolted toward the back exit. Behind him, he heard shouts and the sound of heavy boots closing in. As he stumbled into the alley, the boy's mind raced. He didn't know where to go or who to trust. The weight of the device in his hands felt overwhelming. He glanced back, the sounds of a struggle growing fainter, but the guilt of leaving them behind tore at him. Just as he turned a corner, a sleek black car screeched to a halt in front of him. The driver's window rolled down, revealing the stranger from earlier. Their expression was unreadable, but their tone was sharp. "Get in. Now." The boy hesitated. "Why should I trust you?" The stranger smirked. "You don't have much of a choice, kid. They're closing in." Against his better judgment, the boy climbed into the car. The stranger hit the gas, and the car sped away, weaving through the city streets with practiced precision. The boy clutched the device tightly, his mind racing with questions. "Who are you really?" he demanded. The stranger glanced at him briefly, their expressions still unreadable. "Let's just say I'm not as different from you as you might think. I've been fighting this fight for a long time." The boy wasn't satisfied with the answer, but before he could press further, the car screeched to a stop outside an old, nondescript building. The stranger motioned for him to get out. "Inside." Quickly. The boy obeyed, his nerves on edge. The building was dimly lit and eerily quiet. The stranger led him to a small room filled with monitors and equipment. The boy's eyes widened as he saw live feeds of what looked like the warehouse, now surrounded by armed figures. "They're looking for this," the boy said, holding up the device. The stranger nodded. "And they'll tear apart everything in their way to get it. But they don't know it's here yet. We have one shot to make this count." The boy hesitated. "What do we do?" The stranger gestured to the monitors. "We broadcast the truth. The device has a failsafe. Once activated, it will upload its contents to every major network and platform. They can't cover it up if the whole world sees it at once." The boy's hands trembled as he held the device. "What if they find us before it's done?" The stranger gave him a hard look. Then we fight like hell to make sure they don't. As the boy placed the device into a docking station, the screens lit up, displaying files, images, and videos that made his stomach churn. Corruption, exploitation, and secrets so dark they felt unreal. The stranger began typing furiously, their focus unshakable. Once this starts, there's no going back. You ready for that? The boy nodded, his resolve hardening. I didn't come this far to back down now. The stranger smirked, a glint of admiration in their eyes. Good answer. Just as they hit the upload command, a deafening crash shook the building. The boy turned to see armed figures storming in, their weapons raised. The stranger pulled a hidden lever, and a reinforced door slid shut, blocking the intruders. That won't hold them for long. Stay focused. The upload bar on the screen inched forward agonizingly slowly. The boy's heart pounded as the sounds of the intruders grew louder. The stranger handed him a small device. If they get through, use this. It's your last resort. The boy looked at the device, his hands shaking. What does it do? The stranger gave him a grim smile. Let's hope you don't have to find out. The door behind them began to buckle under the force of the intruders. The upload bar was at 75%. The boy clenched his fists, every fiber of his being screaming to fight or flee. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire erupted, and the door burst open. The intruders poured in, their weapons trained on the boy and the stranger. But just as they stepped forward, the veteran appeared from the shadows, his presence commanding. You forgot one thing, he said, his voice cold and steady. The intruders hesitated, their confidence wavering. In that moment, the upload completed, and the screen flashed with a message, data uploaded successfully. The boy felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived as the leader of the intruders raised their weapon. You think this changes anything? The leader sneered. The veteran stepped closer, his gaze unyielding. It changes everything. As if on cue, the monitors in the room displayed breaking news from every major network. The files from the device were everywhere, exposing the truth in real time. The intruders faltered, their mission unraveling before their eyes. But just as victory seemed certain, the leader of the intruders reached for a hidden weapon. The boy acted on instinct, using the small device the stranger had given him. A blinding flash filled the room, and when the light faded, the intruders were gone. The boy looked around, his heart racing. What just happened? The stranger smirked. Let's just say they won't be bothering us anymore. The veteran placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his expression filled with gratitude. You did good, kid. Better than I ever expected. The boy felt a mix of pride and exhaustion. The world had changed because of him, but the cost was high. As he stepped outside into the night, he couldn't help but wonder what the future held. And then, in the distance, he noticed a figure watching from the shadows. The stranger's smirk faded as they saw it too. Looks like this isn't over, the stranger muttered. The boy clenched his fists, ready for whatever came next. The night air felt heavier as the boy stared at the shadowy figure in the distance. It didn't move, just lingered at the edge of his vision like a ghost. His heart was still pounding from everything that had happened, but now it slowed, and a strange calm began to settle over him. He wasn't the same person who had stumbled into this mess days ago, frightened and uncertain. Something inside him had shifted, grown sharper and clearer. The stranger standing beside him tensed, their hand moving toward their concealed weapon, but the boy held up a hand to stop them. He didn't know why, but he felt no fear toward the figure watching them. Slowly, he took a step forward. The veteran's voice cut through the silence. Careful, kid. We don't know who that is. The boy didn't look back. I don't think they're here to fight. As he approached, the figure stepped into the dim light of a flickering street lamp. It was a woman, older, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. She studied the boy with an expression that was neither hostile nor friendly. You've done something remarkable, she said, her voice steady and deliberate. But you've also made powerful enemies. They won't stop coming after you, even now. The boy crossed his arms, trying to keep his voice steady. Who are you? The woman smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Someone who's been fighting this battle long before you were born. I've been waiting for a moment like this, a moment when the truth couldn't be hidden anymore. And thanks to you, that moment has arrived. The boy felt a flicker of relief, but it was quickly overshadowed by exhaustion. If you've been fighting for so long, why didn't you do anything? Why leave it to people like us? Her smile faded, replaced by a look of regret. Sometimes, it takes someone unexpected to spark the change. My role was to wait for that spark and make sure it didn't burn out. The boy didn't know what to make of her words, but he felt an odd sense of validation. Maybe he wasn't just a pawn in all of this after all. Behind him, the stranger and the veteran approached cautiously. The stranger's expression was skeptical, while the veteran simply looked tired. If you're here to help, the veteran said, then say so. Otherwise, we've got enough problems without another unknown player. The woman's gaze shifted to the veteran, and for a moment, a look of recognition passed between them. I've already helped in ways you can't see, she said cryptically. But now, it's up to you to decide what comes next. The boy looked at the veteran and the stranger, then back at the woman. What do you mean? What comes next? She gestured toward the city skyline, where the glow of media screens lit up the night. News anchors were still dissecting the leaked data, exposing the corruption and lies of those in power. Protests had erupted in major cities, and the world was starting to wake up. The truth is out there now, she said. But truth alone isn't enough. People need leaders, voices they can trust to guide them through the chaos. You've proven you can be that voice. The boy blinked, overwhelmed by the weight of her words. I'm just a kid. I don't know how to lead anyone. The woman stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. You've already done it. You stood up when it mattered most. That's more than most people can say. Before he could respond, she turned and began to walk away, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as she had appeared. The boy stood there for a moment, trying to process everything. The stranger broke the silence. Well, that was cryptic. Do we trust her? The veteran shrugged. Doesn't matter. We've got work to do. Together, they returned to the small safe house where they had set up their temporary base. The world outside was changing rapidly, and they needed to figure out their next move. Over the next few days, they watched as the leaked information rippled across the globe. The public outcry was louder and more unified than anyone had expected. Investigations were launched, officials resigned, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like real change might be possible. But the boy knew it wasn't over. The forces they had exposed weren't going to disappear quietly. They would regroup, adapt, and strike back when the time was right. One night, as he sat alone, staring at the device that had started it all, the boy felt a strange mix of pride and fear. He had helped change the world, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had only scratched the surface. The veteran joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder. You did good, kid. Better than I ever expected. But you're right to be uneasy. The fight's not over. The boy looked up at him, searching for reassurance. Do you think we can really win? The veteran smiled, a rare, genuine smile. Winning's not about one big battle. It's about keeping the fire burning, no matter how many times they try to snuff it out. And as long as people like you are around, I think we've got a shot. The boy nodded, feeling a spark of hope. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. In the days that followed, the boy, the veteran, and the stranger formed an unlikely team. They worked in the shadows, using the chaos created by the leaks to their advantage. They exposed more lies, dismantled more schemes, and inspired others to join their cause. The boy still didn't think of himself as a leader, but he started to see the truth in the woman's words. He didn't need to have all the answers or be perfect. He just needed to keep fighting, one step at a time. And as the sun rose on a new day, the boys stood on the rooftop of their safe house, looking out over the city. The world was still broken, still messy, but it was also full of possibility. For the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay.